Hello and welcome back to my channel. I assume that after a lot of waiting for diagnoses and biopsy results, your treatment is finally scheduled. So now you have to prepare for chemotherapy. And chemotherapy, just like everything that has to do with your oncological diagnosis, also has its nuances. And hopefully this video will help you better deal with those nuances and prepare you as much as possible for the treatment that's ahead. All right, so let's prepare for your first chemotherapy session. The first thing that I want to cover is IV access. So typically chemotherapy is administered through an IV. And for a lot of doctors, and I want to say probably majority of doctors, as soon as you get diagnosed, the first thing that is scheduled is a port placement. There are some doctors that don't require it, and that was my doctor. And honestly, do not make the same mistake I did by saying, I want to try doing chemotherapy through a regular IV. If you have, more than 4 chemotherapy sessions that you will need to complete, my recommendation is to go with a port. There's also the option of a PICC line, and you can ask your doctor if that's something that could potentially work, because a PICC line would also be better than just a traditional IV, because a lot of chemotherapy regimens are really, really hard on your veins, and I dealt with that firsthand. I had very painful vein thromboses, so I got a port after chemo number 4 because they couldn't do it sooner, even though I decided after the first chemotherapy that I needed a port and it wasn't gonna work otherwise, and I would be in a lot of pain. So get a port, and it'll just make things easier. So making sure that you have the appropriate IV access prior to your first chemotherapy session is key. Another important thing in order to prepare for chemotherapy is pre-medications. Majority of chemotherapy drugs require certain medications to be taken prior to the infusion of chemotherapy. And this is to prevent nausea and vomiting, and to prevent a potential allergic reaction. So what you are usually given is Benadryl, and then a number, more than one, of anti-nausea medication. So what typically happens is oncology pharmacy typically gives you a call a day or 2 before your treatment. If you do not receive that phone call, then reach out to them yourself and make sure that you're not missing anything. There are certain protocols, treatment protocols and scenarios where the pre-medication will be administered when you get to the hospital prior to your chemotherapy session. But sometimes there is oral medication that you could take at home about an hour before coming into the hospital. So you already have pre-medication taken care of. And I've done regimens that did both. The first regimen that I did, I had pre-medications that I took at home, and then when I had to do a different regimen, all of the pre-medications were administered when I already got to the hospital. And then another important thing that you should do prior to chemotherapy is apply lidocaine cream on the site of your port and cover it with a saran wrap, so that when you get there, the lidocaine will already be absorbed into your skin, and you basically will not feel any pain when you are being pricked, and your port becomes accessed and you become ready for chemotherapy. This next piece of preparation for chemotherapy is probably the most important one. So because of COVID, I know that a lot of hospitals still have very strict support person policies, but some hospitals do not. So call your hospital or call your infusion or cancer center and ask what their visitor policy is. In 2023, you definitely will not be able to have like a Sex in the City, Samantha and the girls moment during your infusions, because most likely if visitors and support people are allowed, then it'll just be one support person that'll be allowed to come with you. But it's better, one is better than none when it comes to chemotherapy. Sometimes chemotherapy takes a very long time and you're there for a really long time. So it's really nice to have somebody come with you, especially the first time. Because, and this is also me speaking from personal experience, and when I did chemotherapy for the first time, I wasn't able to have a support person. So I was only able to be dropped off. And that was actually unfortunate because I had a really bad reaction to one of the pre-medications that I had to take at home. So it's very important that somebody drives you to chemotherapy and picks you up from chemotherapy if they can't be with you. But pick a designated support person, and hopefully you have a big support village that'll help you get through this. Or if you are more private about your diagnosis and your journey, you'll have somebody close, a close friend that close friend or relative or whoever that can be taking you to chemotherapy. But you have to make sure that somebody takes you there, especially if you have to take medication at home and arrive already pre-medicated, and somebody to pick you up, because basically you will start feeling the effects of chemotherapy most likely before you leave the hospital. But pre-medications and everything should help you handle that as well as possible. And now I think the last, but certainly not the least important piece of preparing for chemotherapy is figuring out what to take with you. So my most important, I think, suggestion would be to make sure that you don't go there hungry. You don't take your pre-meds hungry. You don't arrive hungry. So eat something, nothing crazy, but just, some sort of comfort food or something, starchy, but not like too heavy, something that, you'll definitely be able to keep down, but something to get you through your chemotherapy. That's first thing. So don't go hungry. Second thing I would say is take lots of snacks. And even if these are potato chips or baby carrots or whatever it is that you like, take that with you. Sometimes you just have to do a lot of waiting, because the chemotherapy that will be administered to you is prepared only when you arrive. So oncology pharmacy starts working on the medication when you arrive, and sometimes that takes a while. So there's a lot of waiting around. Then each drug takes a certain time to be administered, and the drugs are not administered all at once. They are administered one at a time to control for allergic reactions or any sort of infusion reactions that you might have. So a lot of times you are there for 2+ hours, 3+ hours, depending on the day, depending on how you feel. So be prepared with food that is packed with you. Also drinks. Make sure that you are always, always, always well hydrated, that you are well hydrated prior to getting to the hospital, and that you have drinks that are your favorite drinks when you're there. because sometimes water doesn't taste good when you start to have chemotherapy administered. So soda, Gatorade, something that will, first of all, be well tasting in your mouth, and just comfort drinks. A lot of infusion centers have snacks and drinks, but a lot of them don't. And you don't want to be just stuck with saltine crackers when you're not feeling well or when you have a bad taste in your mouth. Also, depending on your chemo regimen, sometimes it's recommended that you suck on ice or ice cubes or ice chips when you get there. And majority of infusion centers will have ice chips or even popsicles if you ask for them. But for the first time, when it's your first time at the infusion center, you want to be prepared with everything. So just take, a small kind of thermos cooler type thing with a few ice chips so that you can suck on that ice while that chemotherapy is being administered. So once you have food covered, you're good. The other thing is something to do. So obviously if you have a support person with you, you're probably going to be chatting or watching a movie or listening to somebody or something or watching a show, but definitely take something for entertainment. Like I said, you will be there for a while. Because I wasn't able to have a support person, I wasn't able to, have anybody there with me. So I did a lot of cross stitching, and, a lot of YouTube watching and listening to things. I would discourage you from talking on the phone in the infusion center. It's just really disruptive, and I think disrespectful to some of the other patients, because some people love to sleep and some medication makes them sleepy. And sometimes you might not even be awake during your chemotherapy, but that you will know that after your first chemotherapy session, and maybe you'll just have a nice nap for 3 hours. So you'll know after the first one, and you'll be more prepared next time. Then I would also say take phone chargers with you, battery banks if you need to, because sometimes a plug is not close enough for you to charge your phone. Take a blanket or some nice socks with you. Make sure that you have comfortable clothing. If you have a port, make sure that you have some kind of zip-up clothing so that your port can be accessed. There's also chemo shirts that have zippers specifically for port access. All of that can be found on Amazon, but just be comfortable. And I would say for your very first chemotherapy session, don't worry about your hair, keep your hair. I'll cover hair and my experience with it in a different video. But I think that's it. Just have, just go there with an open mind. The nursing staff is usually an excellent support resource, an excellent information resource. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Literally ask, what are we doing now? What is this medication now? How do you suggest I prepare for it? Because, as I said, I was borderline blacked out at my first chemo session because one of the drugs was way too strong for me, one of the anti-nausea medications, and a nurse noted that. She told me when I finally came to that it shouldn't have been this way, and that I should address this with my doctor, and that the medication should be replaced. So listen to the nurses, ask the nurses as many questions as possible, keep an open mind. You will get through it. And just know that everybody who is there, specifically the nursing staff, is there to support you and help you get through this really hard process, but you will be strong enough and you will get through it. And never be afraid to speak up if something feels weird. If something feels weird to you, that means that something is going on and it's your body and you are the best advocate for your body. So if a drug starts being administered and you feel weird, speak up immediately. Don't be afraid to press that call button. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say, is this okay? Is this a side effect that's expected or not? Because a lot of times, if you are having a side effect, then the infusion needs to be paused, the side effect needs to be addressed, and then the infusion can continue after you no longer have that reaction. And these are all very, very important things to note. So don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. It's very, very important to remember throughout the entire treatment and throughout the entire cancer diagnosis process and journey, as people love to call it. So hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please comment below. I will continue to release videos with different topics related to cancer diagnosis and treatment. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to support where I can. Thanks.